Nick, welcome to another Modern Mind Ancient book.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are going to do an overview or a survey of the book of Jonah.
Jonah.
Everybody knows Jonah.
Yeah, but what was the other way that you said it?
It's like, yeah, I don't want to say it because I'm not sure if it's right.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. I just didn't mean to put you on the spot with that.
Yeah, it's something.
Everybody knows Jonah,
like yeah.
And everybody pronounces it that way.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep, Jonah. So, interesting character. Was there a big fish?
When we get to that, I'd like to talk about it because I think that's a very interesting bone of contention. I almost don't understand why it's such a problem.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
So title and authorship. Jonah, whose name means dove, which is pretty interesting, at least from a Christian perspective.
Right, there's symbolism there.
It's a motif.
Yep.
Right? Relates in the book that he is the son of Amittai. That's in 2 Kings 14 and verse 25. And it gives some background that it was during the reign of Jeroboam 793 to 753, that Jeroboam restored the border of Israel from the entrance of Hamath as far as the sea of the Arabah, according to the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, which he spoke through his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet, who was of Gath-Hepher. Gath-Hepher was a town in the Galilee. Odd. Doves in Galilee.
It's almost like we're getting somewhere with this story.
Yeah, there seems to be these motifs in these things, right? So, Jonah should be considered a prophet of northern Israel. The prophetic ministry of Jonah was greater than the prophecy contained in the book, which is evidenced by 2 Kings 14. So he served in the king's court as a seer.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is interesting too. That a lot of his additional stuff was outside of the book that's named for him. So,
yeah. Well, there's references in these books where it says, "See the annals of the kings," and things like that. Stuff that was probably destroyed when the temple was destroyed twice.
Right. And there's even the extra biblical books that overlap in some places, and so those are interesting.
Yeah, those are interesting. There's a lot when it comes to this stuff. So, there are many people who reject the historicity of Jonah, saying that it's unbelievable.
Right. And that's the part, as I was mentioning before, that sort of trips me out. Now, if somebody is generally skeptical of the Bible, we could have that conversation.
Sure.
And I can understand where that's coming from. But something that I find interesting with Jonah in particular is that there are people who generally believe the Bible to be true. And then they look at Jonah and they say, well, that was, is metaphorical, it was allegory, it was, it wasn't literally true. And while I understand that there were a lot of literal events that took place in the Bible that also had symbolism tied to them, the thing that, the reason that this trips me out a little bit is because those same people, and I would sometimes group myself in with them, is like we could watch a video with 25 amazing facts that'll blow your mind. And buy them wholesale because some YouTuber said it. And then
History Channel.
Right, yeah, anything like that. And then it's like, okay, if I do believe in the God of the Bible and that many of the things in the Bible are true, is it really that unbelievable that God who created the universe could also cause a fish, or in some translations, sea monster, to not digest someone for a few days? And transport. It doesn't seem.
It is. It's the realm of miraculous.
It is. It's
absolutely the realm of miraculous.
Absolutely.
Right. So.
And if somebody's generally skeptical about the miracles, fine. That's cool.
Well, so for a Christian, this is interesting because Jesus talked about this, right?
Right.
Now, I think I have a little different perspective.
Bring it.
Maybe than most people.
Okay.
So let's do the Jesus story. Because not that I would ever go forward and then take things backwards. I think we need to go backwards and take things forward.
Right.
Right, understanding-wise.
Sure.
But it's interesting what he says. So Jesus taught the book of Jonah, right? He taught on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus answered and he said to them, an evil and adulterous generation craves for a sign, and yet no sign shall be given it, but the sign of Jonah the prophet. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a sea monster, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh shall stand up with this generation at the judgment, and shall condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And behold, someone greater than Jonah is here. And that's Matthew 12:39-41, and Luke 11:29-32. So our document actually says that he teaches the historicity of a great fish, right?
Right.
But I don't care if there's a fish or not. And I'll explain why. So, the ancient mind is not caught up in scientific facts.
They don't prioritize concrete conclusions the way that we do.
Well, they don't need to.
That's what I mean.
Right?
It's not...
These stories are not focused on reproducible results.
Right.
Right? It's not the scientific method as we imagine it with our Western minds.
It wouldn't have even been written this way had it been, and that wasn't the purpose of it.
Yeah,
So.
this is not a the methodology of surviving in the belly of a fish for 3 days. Was it the belly of a fish? I don't know. The word's kind of like the sea monster, right? Mm-hmm. So if we go back to the ancient mind, we would take into consideration that the ancient Near Eastern worldview saw the sea as a chaotic place where men are not welcome.
Right.
And that Jonah went into the sea on a boat to escape his duty.
Mm-hmm.
Being a man who is supposed to be a light to the world, trying to escape, he was thrown into the chaos of the sea and then spit back up on the shores of the sea, the Goyim, right? These Gentile people. He went into the sea and ended up at the sea to do his job, the dove. Now, Jesus said these words in Galilee, where Jonah was from.
Yep.
So, I want to go back to this time, and I want to say, quit quarreling over fish or sea monsters.
Right.
What does it matter? There's motifs. There's something to be learned here.
And that's more important than literal historicity.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you that it doesn't actually matter in our understanding.
Not if you go back to the ancient mind, they weren't concerned about it.
Right. All I'm saying is I don't have a problem either believing that it could literally be true, because there's no reason it couldn't be.
I believe that Jesus figured out how to make bread and fish that weren't there.
Right.
I believe that he walked through doors and showed up in places, then disappeared the same way, and that he rose up into the sky and all that stuff.
So if someone says to me that they believe in the basically the spirit behind the story, that they understand and accept the motifs, but they don't think that it was literal, I don't have a problem with that. As much as it may have seemed that I did when I said that I don't understand it, it's more that I don't necessarily see it from a perspective of there's no way it could have happened.
Right.
Because unless you're going to dismiss all of the miraculous, in which case we can have that conversation too.
I can't wait to get into the details of this. If we weren't doing a survey, I'd go crazy right now.
Yeah,
because this book actually, for me, like the prophets are prophetic.
Well, that's a deep thought, isn't it?
Yeah, odd, right?
Right.
And so, why was this particular story recorded? I mean, let's go into the big book of questions. Who were the Ninevites? What did they believe? Why did they believe it? Who was their king? How was their history recorded? What did their history record? How did they come to the point that they were willing to repent? What did they worship? Who did they worship? How did their king express himself? How did Jonah present himself in that city? Why was Jonah nervous to go there? Why did Jonah feel like they would repent? What was it about Jonah that didn't made him not want to go there? What was it about Israel at the point of this? Right? I mean, you see? Now, you go through all these questions, and then what you end up with The book of Jonah is pretty sweet, dude.
Right. Yeah. Well, but I'm glad you're not actually trying to answer those right now, because I could only brush up against a few of those, and then most of them, the answer would just be I don't know.
Well, we're gonna get a little bit into it,
right?
Yeah, right now.
Right.
So,
yep.
the historical background. This is interesting. So, scholars historically have said that they thought that perhaps this book is not the age that we're presenting it, right? The 900s, sure. Right? And we know, based on the minor prophets that we've been going through, that this was a boon of prophetic insight, right?
Right.
And so, now some of the issues are that Assyria, at this point, didn't have Nineveh as its capital at the writing of the book of Jonah.
Right. So it seems like a discrepancy between what was what he was saying and what was actually known in that period.
Yep.
Yeah.
But there's arguments in here that we could go through, right? That say, well, perhaps because of the way they speak, perhaps because of whatever. But now, consider this: was Ur of the Chaldees? It wasn't, right? The Chaldeans were not necessarily a respected people at the time that Babylon held power. And so while Israel was captive in Babylon, it was known that these nomadic people that had tried numerous times to take power in Babylon were south of them in the land, which was Ur at that point. And so it became Ur of the Chaldees. Because there's editorial notes in these to keep it fresh. Just like we do now, we take and we translate from Greek or Aramaic or Hebrew, and, we make it like something that we can understand.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of, right?
Right.
So, I would very much say that, to me, these arguments don't hold a lot of weight. It probably, more than likely, is that prophetic boon time, in the BC. I don't even know what you call it. Would it be the 7th century, 8th century BC?
Right, and it sort of falls into that category again, at least to me, of it. The timing doesn't matter if the content is there. We can disagree, and maybe somebody would say the historical argument would negate that it's true, but when the motifs line up, when it is referenced, when it is brought back again and Jesus talks about it, it's like, I'm not so concerned if it was this exact year or not, because that wasn't the point of
so you're talking about just in terms of the validation of the book, because Jesus
right. If somebody's going to say yes, yeah. No, I'm not saying it doesn't matter at all where it appeared in history, because it affects who's hearing it.
That's for a Christian, that's reasonable, right? But I mean, even for a practitioner of Judaism, this book is accepted as canon, per se, right? So. There's this historicity thing, but I'm not overtly concerned about those arguments, meaning additional information that wasn't present at the time of Jonah, because you just have editorial stuff in these documents, of course, right? And then the other thing we touched on the fish, and we already kind of exhausted that. I mean, whether it's the ancient mind recounting the waters that held these ancient sea creatures like Tiamat and this
and like you said, the general representation of water as chaos,
the Gentiles being the sea and that sort of thing. Sure. So whether it's that is what it is, or there was a literal some sort of sea creature that swallowed them, spit them up on the beaches of Nineveh, right? So I'm not concerned about either one of those because it's not a scientific document. I'm more concerned with the ancient mind and how it saw these stories and these motifs and how they play out throughout the entire Bible, which this book absolutely has a voice.
Oh yeah,
in the entire Bible.
I guess I'd be more concerned though if I was Jonah, only because that sounds really nasty. For everyone else, it's just kind of like it's whatever, dude.
He's kind of a bitter complainer too.
We'll get to
like
that.
Me. So the other kind of thing is the miraculous nature, not only of that, but the fact that the city of Nineveh repented. Right. The entire city.
Yeah.
So that's interesting thing. But there's also some things to consider, in that there had been catastrophe, and that the king at that point at Nineveh did worship above everything else one particular god. In some degree, now there was a pantheon, but the king, let me find the note here, did accept the message. There it is. So the king confined his worship to the god Nebo, and it wasn't necessarily what you might consider, I guess, the Jewish version of there's only one God and there is no other, right? There was a pantheon available.
Right.
But the king's heart was softening toward one God.
Mm-hmm.
And there had been tragedies at this time, previous to it.
Sure.
And was it an eclipse, right? So
right, then that was a big deal.
Signs in the heavens.
Yeah.
You know?
To the ancient mind, that mattered, yeah.
And so, Jonah shows up and he says, probably something like this, on behalf of the one true God, you guys stop doing these things and stop it before he kills you all. I kind of hope he kills you all, but please stop, Right. And then...
Which is such an interesting attitude, man. Not because we can't relate to it, but maybe more so because we can.
Yeah.
And it maybe some people wouldn't like to admit it, but I could see myself in there. There's some people where it's like, and you can even flip back and forth between, they'll never repent, all the way to, I hope they don't, because I don't like them, I'm worried that they would. If I go and say something to them, they're going to, be saved. And,
I find it interesting that there was a Gentile nation who had a soft heart.
Right.
Toward the God of Israel.
That wasn't the way that it tended to go, but...
A very odd scenario.
It's also... It really speaks a lot, though, about one of the criticisms of especially the Old Testament, mm-hmm. is the perceived lack of mercy from Yahweh. Despite the numerous times that he tried to bring people along, gave them the last chance, if it's only this many. And here with Nineveh, it's like he's fighting his boy, who's been a prophet, to get him to go to these people who he's supposed to, in air quotes, nobody can see me, I'm doing this, supposed to hate.
Yeah.
And yet he's showing love.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about it is I don't... See, I think that was his image of it, right? Like,
right.
Yeah, but, Israel was supposed to be a light to all the nations.
Right.
And so, and it's also interesting to me. I mean, there's a few books that are out there. There's a lot of stories, Miracles for Today, in God's, or God in their hearts, or something. There's stories, mm-hmm. where, people were ready for the gospel, not because they had heard it, not because Jesus appeared to them, but because God had been speaking for thousands of years in that culture and preparing that.
Right. Sure. And that can happen on a societal level or an individual level.
Well, and if we just go back to this book, we can conclusively say that most of the ancient Near East had very shared values and understandings.
Right.
Very shared.
Maybe more than sometimes we would like to think, because...
Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, right. is in the law of Hammurabi.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, right. I mean, you get... Avram was from a very different place. He was from between the two waters, between the two rivers.
Abraham, for anyone who didn't listen to the previous...
Yeah. But you have shared culture. And so, right. I'm pretty sure that this is a representation of shared culture in lots of ways.
Right.
The story, the motifs, how the king responded, how the prophet Jonah felt and responded. I mean, I'm pretty sure that this book represents a very, very, very Middle Eastern way of thinking. Ancient Near Eastern way of thinking.
Sure. But I think there's also that element, and maybe one of the reasons among many, and one of them being the craziness of the fish story, is that even though this book is so rooted in that Middle Eastern ancient mindset.
Ancient Near Eastern mindset.
There's also the parts that we can relate to.
Yeah.
And Jonah's whole attitude, and probably the people at the time, saying, well, sure, Yahweh could have chosen anyone, but he picked us.
Yeah.
We're better. We don't like those people.
Yeah.
And even if they could do right, we don't particularly want them to, because then they're going to be like us.
Yeah, that was Jonah's...
That was
the book is presented that way.
His deal. And and if we're honest, we could at least be tempted to
me
think
it
that
screams of the New Testament.
Right. And yes. And just generally our walk, we could easily fall into this prideful view of things where we really get our priorities messed up.
Yeah, like life application stuff, right? You want to be a faithful preacher that God calls you to be, whatever that is, whoever that is.
Right. And of course we all want to help people. We all want to lead them to Jesus, except for those people we don't like. Those ones, they can just go the wrong way down the Walmart aisle. And
I'm really trying not to be that person.
Oh, absolutely. No, I agree with you. I don't want to be that person either, but that's why this hits so hard.
Yeah. There's so much more to this story though than just that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We'll get into it in a little bit. So the first recipients were Israelites, living during the mid-8th century BC. Question answered. During the reign of Jeroboam II. Jeroboam was not a good king, but he was a strong military leader who expanded the power of Israel over most of the territory that was controlled during the apex of the United Kingdom. See 2 Kings 14:23-29. He restored the border of Israel from the entrance of Hamath to the Sea of Arabah, according to the word of the Lord, the God of Israel. For the Lord saw the affliction of Israel, which was very bitter, for there was neither bond nor free, nor was there any helper for Israel. You want to read this like, you're living in that period, outside of territorial borders, but you're secure, and your internal culture is rough, right? So Israel was not doing well spiritually at the time.
No, they had gone back and forth with good leaders and bad leaders. Are currently not.
Which actually might be more of a motivator for Jonah, right? So he's kind of like, why would I go to them? They're influencing us to be bad.
Right, these are the people who are causing all of our problems.
I want my people to repent. I don't need them to repent. I need them to repent first. Yeah, right. But God had another story.
Yeah.
Right? It seemed like Assyria had to repent first, and then perhaps Israel could follow. Maybe the Gentiles had to repent first, and then Israel could follow.
It's almost like God saw a bigger picture than a man could see.
I'm telling you, there's a lot in this one. So that's how you'd want to be, right? You don't understand that God is compassionate and gracious.